Hello and welcome to the Greek version of Acts 7, 44 through 50 today. We're almost done with Acts chapter 7. We've been going on in Stephen's sermon now for over a week, or about a week. Stephen has been preaching to the Sanhedrin. They brought false charges against him. They said this guy's preaching against Moses and against God, and he's saying that Jesus is going to destroy this temple and change the customs of Moses. And Acts says these are false charges. Stephen gets up to defend himself. For the bulk of this chapter, he's been telling the story of Israel, reaching back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he's been showing that, or I think the implication is that the Jesus movement is in perfect continuity with the story of Israel. That in fact, they are the true heirs of the people of God. It is the followers of Jesus that actually have been faithful to God. And that they are the heirs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A couple of other themes in the way he tells the story. One is the displacement of the people of God. He has not yet gotten to the point where Israel is actually located somewhere. It's in the verses today that Israel actually settles down. The feel we have throughout this chapter is that God has been meeting Israel all over the world. Abraham in Mesopotamia and in Haran. And Abraham bought, in Stephen's version of the story, Abraham bought a burial place in Shechem in Samaria. And Jacob was in Egypt. Of course, Joseph was in Egypt. And Joseph married an Egyptian woman. Moses married a Midianite woman and had children with them, which goes against the ethnocentricity of the people of God. The people of God can include people who are not Jews by birth. Even further, another important theme is God's people often aren't God's people. That the leaders of Israel and the people of Israel often rebel against God. And there's a clear alignment in the way he tells the story, for example, between Moses and Jesus. And just as the people of Israel rejected Moses, so they reject Jesus. He's turned the tables on them implicitly, whether they got it or not. That, in fact, he is not preaching against God, but in fact, he is the true prophet of God and what God's doing. Jesus didn't come to destroy the temple. The temple will be destroyed. This may be an implication. The temple will be destroyed because of the sins of the people, because the people have made an idol of it, as we'll see maybe in today's reading. And Jesus didn't come to change the customs of Moses. As we know from elsewhere in the New Testament, he came to fulfill them. Well, okay, so let's dive into the sermon. We're now reaching the climax of the sermon. Well, let me say the turning point of the sermon happens in today's reading, and the climax happens somewhere at the juncture between the end of today's reading and the beginning of tomorrow. We'll see tomorrow. Tomorrow is the "Thou art the man" moment in the sermon, when Stephen turns the table and says, "You're the problem. You're the reason," and of course he gets stoned for it. Now, we'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay, let's go ahead and read. The Heiskene to Martyriou, the tent of witness, which was, the tent of witness was, this is the imperfect of Amy, the tent of witness was with the fathers, dative, of us in the desert. By the way, the previous verse has talked about the tent of Moloch. I can actually go back to it. The tent of Moloch. You took up the tent of Moloch. The tent of Moses was the tent of witness. There's a contrast here, which our fathers was with our fathers in the desert. Just as the one who spoke to Moses commanded. Okay, this is God. This is a participle, a present active participle, nominative masculine singular. Just as the one who spoke to Moses commanded. This is an aorist. A C is the key to a hidden sigma. So we have a hidden sigma alpha, that's aorist. This is middle because it's amenuata, third person singular, diatasso. The one who spoke to Moses commanded to make, infinitive, aorist, sigma alpha, 6 out of 7 infinitives end in I. Just as the one who spoke to Moses commanded to make it, that is to make the tent, the skene, feminine, according to the type which he had seen. This is the perfect tense of horao. Moses had seen it on the mountain and it stuck with him. The perfect tense. By the way, type here, according to the type, By the way, on Saturday, I hope to lay out some parallels between Hebrews and this sermon in Acts 7 and speculate on some of what's going on. But this word type, again, we saw this in the previous verse. They made idols, the idols which you made, the types that you made, but they're of the wrong thing. Moses made it according to the true type that is up in heaven, or that at least God showed him. According to the type, so there's a contrast between the type that Moses made and the type that the children of Israel in disobedience made. To make according to the type which he had seen, relative pronoun, relative clause, relative pronoun. Verse 45, which, this is not, see, same letters but different accents. Ain with a circumflex is was. Hain with a rough breathing mark and this kind of a grave accent or an acute. It'd normally be a grave, is a relative pronoun. Which, or that, also the fathers of us, the nominative, brought in, agagon, again, this is the aorist of Pharaoh, diadexamenoi, this is a aorist participle, aorist deponent, men are passive or middle. This is a middle, but it's deponent because it's diadecami. Xi is a key to hidden sigma, so hidden sigma alpha, it's aorist middle participle, nominative masculine plural. That also our fathers, having received it, brought in with Joshua. Interesting here. I think that the Greek speakers, that Luke's audience would see this idea of bringing in with Jesus. Jesus is the Greek form of the word Joshua, but of course it's talking about Joshua in the story. But I wonder if, ding, that there would have been a connection made by Luke's audience. So the tent of witness that the fathers of us brought in, having received it with Joshua, in the possession of the nations or of the Gentiles of the land of Canaan, that God pushed out from the face of our fathers until the times of David, until the days of David. Okay, so little Greek there. Anything I've missed? This here, what is this? This is not a high-frequency word. Let me look at my handy-dandy notebook here. Force out. This is exotheo. Exotheo. Wow, that's a really weird aorist here. It's lost the the. We've seen this before, I believe. I have another book in my other office that tells me how many times this word occurs in Acts and how many times in the whole New Testament. Let's just say it's not a lot of times in the New Testament. I'm trying to remember. I think it's something like 4 times. No more than that, I don't think, in the whole New Testament. And 2 of them have been in Acts. Okay, I'm not. Don't hold me to those numbers, but I think they're approximately correct. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 46. Who found favor before the Lord? Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That's somewhere else. That's in Hebrews 11, I believe. But in this chapter, I believe it says that Joseph found favor. So there might be an implicit comparison between Joseph and David here, maybe. But David certainly found favor before the Lord. And he asked, this is the aorist of Iteo, sigma alpha aorist. It seems to be middle aorist, and it's augmented, alpha iota. The alpha gets fried and the iota hangs on for dear life. And he asked to find a resting place for the God of Jacob. Now, I think, as I said in the podcast version of this, I think that Stephen is saying God doesn't have a resting place. And of course, both the Sanhedrin and Luke's audience would know that God said no. God doesn't have a resting place. We've seen that's been the point throughout the whole sermon. God doesn't stop. Nor does he locate himself. Well, it's not like Forrest Gump. Well, I'm pretty tired now. I think I'll go home. No, that's not God. God doesn't rest. Now I know there's the whole Sabbath thing, but we'll save that for never. Okay, verse 47. But Solomon built him a house. See this contrast here. And this is where the story stops. I love this. We've been going along, telling the story, Abraham, Joseph, Moses. We're in the 47th verse here. David tried to find a resting place, but Solomon built him a house. Now, there are some who think that Stephen is saying that it was a mistake to build the temple, or that the temple itself is sinful. I don't think that's the case, really. I think that what Stephen is saying or implying is that Israel has made an idol out of the temple. Because if Stephen was actually talking against the temple, that would mean that the false accusers weren't false accusers, that he really was. I think he's being more nuanced here. And let's look in verse 48. But the highest does not dwell in things made by hands. You see, what I think what he's saying is, you guys have made an idol out of the temple. You're treating it as if it's where God is located. It's like what happened in the days of Jeremiah. I think it's Jeremiah 9. You know, you guys are saying, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. We can hide in here. God's not going to let his house be destroyed. Guess what? God let his house be destroyed. And, of course, Stephen's audience would know that God had let his house be destroyed again by the Romans. So there's a kind of a foreshadowing here to anyone listening to this in Acts. God built him a house, but God cannot be tied down to a house. God is, especially things built by hands. It's kind of like remember Peter on in the Transfiguration. Shall we build 3 tents for you guys? You know, God does not dwell in buildings made by hands, just as the prophet says. And then he quotes Isaiah 66. The heaven is my throne. Heaven to me is throne. There's no is here. We have to insert it. The heaven to me is throne, and the earth is footstool of my feet. What sort of house will you build for me, says the Lord? Or what sort of place of my resting? And I'm going to have to take it out of so I can see the rest of it. Verse 50, has not my hand made all these things? And this is a question expecting a yes answer. Yes, your hand has made all these things. And so it's ridiculous for you to think that God can be located in a particular spot. God cannot be tied down. Of course, this applies to denominations. What denomination will you build for me? Or a country? What nation will you build for me? What local church will you build for me? What First Baptist will you build for me? God cannot be tied down. God is everywhere present, and the people of God are across space and time. Of course, the people of God are always visibly located in a community, but in terms of the true people of God, it's an invisible church that cannot be seen, there aren't special church, glasses. Oh, I can see 85% of this church is actually Christian. The people of God cannot be tied down to a place and time, and God cannot be tied down to a specific. I've got God in a box here. Look, you want to see? Oh yeah, isn't he great? No, not going to happen. So great stuff, and of course we're going to see where Stephen goes next. Stephen's not pulling any punches here. I think we're going to see tomorrow, especially, why he gets stoned. And this particular point, he is, I think, implicitly accusing them of idolatry. By the way, I missed something yesterday that I want to point out. The may here with a question mark, just like today, we had ooh with a question, which is a question expecting a yes answer. I missed yesterday that here we have may with a question mark. That's a question expecting a no answer. So the way this should be translated is something like, sacrificial victims and sacrifice you haven't brought to me for 40 years, have you, in the desert, O house of Israel? You didn't do that, did you? So that's a question expecting a no answer, just like today is a question expecting a yes answer. Well, this has been yet more. Tomorrow, Lord willing, we will finish Stephen's sermon and witness the first martyr that we know of for the Jesus movement, other than Jesus, of course.